Yeah, welcome to the first in our new seminar series, What Were We Thinking? I am Andrea Hurst, National Research Foundation Saatchi Chair in Identities and Social Cohesion in Africa, just called ISCIA for short. And I'd like you to meet just very quickly the two co-hosts of the seminar, Emma Hay and Gary Kukumur. Yeah, you can
Hello.
just give us a wave. Yeah, who are both postdocs with the ISCIA chair. You're going to hear a lot more from both of them as the seminar progresses. So I'll just give a brief introduction. So what were we thinking? It's a subtly different question, kind of depending on the emphasis. So what were we thinking? What were we thinking? And what were we thinking? But it's always accompanied by a kind of sense of bemusement or perplexity or self-ridicule over our own naivety or our stupidity or our madness. But our focus in this series is on the planetary crisis that we face right now in the present, with its sheaf of human-created environmental calamities, and its existential threat, really, to humanity itself. Whether we care about humanity or not is another question we need to ask ourselves. But despite this clear evidence, anyway, of global decline, the very real possibility of an existential threat to ourselves, and despite increasing global efforts to kind of mitigate and adapt to the change through agreements like the Paris Accord, the Sustainable Development Goals, despite all of this, we seem to just continue unabated on this path towards destruction, self-destruction. So asking the question, what were we thinking, is already to kind of have made a shift in perspective, a perspective that enables us, I think, to reflect on the past with new eyes. What has been so problematic in our past thinking that we now face environmental and social catastrophe? Is such thinking really a thing of the past, though? We know that we have made some changes, but it's not anything close enough to undo the damage we've created. Or shifting our kind of mode to the present, is there thinking going on at all? And we're assuming that human activity is the outcome of human thought. It follows that if we change the way we think, we can change our actions and thereby the world. But what is it that makes us seemingly unable to take these necessary steps to avert the clearly impending environmental and social catastrophe? I mean, if thinking can change our path, does our inability to change our path suggest that we are not yet thinking? So then what exactly is thinking, compared, for instance, with calculating? Turning to the future, so yeah, what now? How do we begin thinking? Or how do we change our thinking in face of the threat posed to the world by our activities? That's the brief for us for this year. It's to try to understand this thing called thinking and how we've ended up in this situation of environmental crisis. And to kick us off on this monumental task, I'm very happy to pass the buck on to Gary Kukumur, who will pose the question for us, well, why don't we look up? Where did we lose the plot? So Gary, thank you. Over to you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Andrea, and thanks to Emma, who's co-hosting with me. And thanks to everyone who's here. I'm going to share the screen, and then hopefully we can, the YouTube clip will also work on that. Let me just, there we go. So the question I posed today is the question of why won't we look up, and where did we lose the plot? And it's premised on the movie Don't Look Up, that was released on Netflix about a year and a half ago, in which the basic premise is that two scientists discover a comet hurtling to Earth. It's a planet killer, and they go about trying to warn the Earth, and particularly the American president, in terms of how they do that. And it ends up eventually in a corporate attempt to repurpose the comet, which fails, and the comet then strikes the Earth, and everyone basically dies except for an elite group that escape on a spaceship out into space. So it's a deliberate construct that tries to examine really the question about climate change and why we're not doing anything about climate change. And so I thought maybe where we could start is just with a clip of that. I'm going to try now, just in a key scene.
Into the right place, because on this show we like to say things.
Oh, we do. Just stop. I'm sorry, but not everything needs to sound so goddamn clever or charming or likable all the time. Sometimes we need to just be able to say things to one another. We need to hear things. Look, let's establish once again that there is a huge comet headed towards Earth. And the reason we know that there is a comet is because we saw it. We saw it with our own eyes using a telescope. I mean, for God's sakes, we took a fucking picture of it. What other proof do we need? And if we can't all agree at the bare minimum that a giant comet the size of Mount Everest hurtling its way towards planet Earth is not a fucking good thing, then what the hell happened to us? I mean, my God, how do we even talk to each other? What have we done to ourselves? How do we fix it? We should have deflected this comet when we had the fucking chance, but we didn't do it. I don't know why we didn't do it. And now they're actually firing scientists like me for speaking out, for opposing them. And I'm sure many of the people out there aren't even going to listen to what I just said, because they have their own political ideology. But I assure you, I am not on one side or the other. I'm just telling you the fucking truth.
I think this would be a good time to establish that Isherwell and the president have both said that there's benefits to be had.
Well, the president of the United States is fucking lying. Look, I'm just like all of you. I hope to God that this president knows what she's doing. I hope she's got us all taken care of. But the truth is, I think this whole administration has completely lost their fucking mind. I just want to go home more than anything. But if there's one thing that I pray that all of you hear from what I have just said, is that all of us,
So that's just a very short clip from the movie. It's one of the key scenes where there's a transition where the scientist, Dr. Mindy, who had been the darling of the media, and particularly this show, is told of the plan by the president, who decides to abort a mission to destroy the comet and instead send a commercial enterprise there to mine it. And this is his response on camera, on live camera. And the central question he asks is, what the hell happened to us? There's a couple of F words spread liberally through it. But the real question is that what he's trying to ask is that if we can't come to consensus on the imminent threat that we are faced, how did that happen? And what I wanted to do is just explore that question a little bit more in terms of detail. So the first thing to ask is what do we know? And very clearly the science is telling us a number of things. The first thing is that change is here and the change is escalating. And so two graphs show that very clearly. The one is the daily surface air temperature, and the other one is the daily sea surface temperature. And what you'll see there, the band of the sort of gray squiggles is the average over the last years, the global average on both of them. The yellow one is last year's average, and the black squiggly little worm line at the top of everything is this year's 2024. And what you can notice from that, which is immediately apparent, is that last year's average temperature, both sea and land, was way above the norm. And this year has started way above last year. And in effect, what we are doing is that we are heating up the environment, and that is both is air, land, and ocean. And simultaneously, whilst we're heating up things, we are reducing resilience of the biosphere and living organisms within that. And it is conditions that the current biosphere has never experienced before. So we're entering into new territory in terms of going forward. If you look at it slightly differently, the Stockholm Resilience Center has 9 planetary boundaries. And you can see that from 2009, where 6 of the boundaries that they set up, 3 of the boundaries were crossed of the 9. In 2015, 4 of those boundaries were crossed. In 2023, 6 of those boundaries crossed. So it's escalating. The change is not only here, but it is escalating rapidly. And there, I'm not going to go through all of the 9 boundaries, but you can see them below there in the red are the ones that are the ones most critically that have been crossed at this point in time. So how do we see this? And I don't know if anyone knows where this picture is taken or what this picture is of. It's a very recent picture, and it's of a place called Derna in Libya. In September last year, the storm Daniel that came across the Mediterranean dumped 400 millimeters in one day. Now, that's a fair amount of water. And what it did is it broke 2 dams that were known to have cracks, and those were flood prevention dams. And the net result was, the estimates are between 10 to 20,000 people dead and missing. So they haven't been able to count exactly because they haven't been able to find everyone, and they haven't been able to get into the city to do that. But the estimate was almost a quarter of the city was washed away in that flood event. It's not unique to other places in the world. We've had recent examples here in South Africa. So the eThekwini rain bomb in 2022, which was 351 millimeters in 24 hours, had devastating effects. And you saw tankers being washed up on the beach and Toyota being submerged and communities being washed away. But it wasn't isolated. There was another event in 2019 in which 168 millimeters fell. So a little bit, about half of it, but also very severe flooding. And it was a warning of what was coming. And the warning wasn't attended to, or not sufficiently. And that's a key question for us. eThekwini was seen as the green city, as the city most prepared in terms of climate change. And it is no longer. The sad joke is that it is green now, but green from other reasons, not because of its environmental process. And then last year, in the same September period, the Western Cape had a rain bomb, which saw 143 to 193 millimeters dumped in a very short period of time, more rain in 3 days than they had in the 2 months prior. And you see the Bort River there, which is a national route, national bridge across the national route, was washed away, and it took them about 1.5 months to 2 months to fix that bridge. And that caused great devastation and disruption to traffic and the economies and how things happened. Now, we've had more recent examples of that locally. This is the fire that happened in Skoones a couple of weeks ago. And what we can expect as things get drier and hotter and windier is that we'll see more of this. And just to be clear, the felt fire or bushfires are not climate change per se. What is climate change is the amplitude of it, the amplification of it, is that it happens more regularly and is hotter. And in the case of these fires, what exacerbated the situation is the alien trees that were amongst the fynbos, which heats to such an extent that the fynbos seed explodes. And so whilst fynbos is adapted to fire, it's not adapted to fire of this heat. And we saw that this happened very recently in our own city. And then from September last year, this is the life-saving hut on Kings Beach. And in effect, it's saying to us that if you look at 2055, which is a very short period from us, that we are going to see a changed world. We're going to see humidity. So heat is not necessarily the killer. Humidity is. It's when the body stops sweating beyond a certain point. Floods, we know that. Wildfires, we know that. Drought, we've experienced a 7 to 8 year drought in our bay, and it looks like our dam levels are dropping again. Disease, so COVID, a lot of people speculate that COVID was as an outcome of climate change or biodiversity loss. And then what we do see is broken roads, pipes, and houses. So eThekwini is still struggling with its sewage system, which was broken in 2022. They haven't been able to repair all of it. And so you have sewage flowing into rivers and then flowing onto your beaches. That impacts tourism and it impacts people directly. So we know that the climate is changing, and we have enough visible evidence to tell us that there's something serious going on. The one that I wanted to mention in addition to climate change is biodiversity loss. And the UN estimates that we're at risk of 1 million species dying in a very short period of time. And there's a new study out that says that if you include insects, then it's 2 million species that we are looking at losing in a very short period of time, so within our lifetimes. And the loss of insects means that there's a loss of pollinators, which means that there's a cascading effect on the natural environment. What we do know is what causes this biodiversity loss, and that's changes in land and sea use, so agriculture, fishing, other things like that. Climate change is one of the key ones. Pollution, and that's pollution of all forms, so in the air, in sea, and land. And then exploitation of natural resources, and it's over-exploitation of natural resources beyond the ability to regenerate. And the fifth one is invasive species. So humans particularly have shipped species all over the world to, for instance, in our case, stabilize dunes, and those species are not adapted to this environment, and they thrive. And so they have no natural predators, and they start taking over water resources and out-compete other local species. So the point is very clear, is that the crisis is clear. We know enough of what's happening to know that it's serious, that it's escalating. And we also know enough to know where the areas are that are impacting it and why it's been caused. And so climate change, particularly fossil fuel, is the big issue. The question, though, is why, in the face of what we know, and in the face of this escalating existential threat, why are we not doing sufficiently enough? And so what I wanted to do is just in this first session is just share some ideas on that, but focus particularly on one author that I've come across recently, and that's Lesley Green, who's at UCT, who wrote Rock, Water, Life, and some ideas on why exactly, what were we thinking, and why are we thinking in that way. So before we get there, just as the last thing, is that this existential threat that we face is faced by the entire biosphere as we know it, which is a very small area. So it's about 11 kilometers down, about, I can't see it there, about 15, sorry, let me just, 15 up. So very small range. It's effectively, when you stand on the beach and you look at the horizon, you see 15 kilometers into the distance. Now, within that range is where life on the planet exists. And that is under threat at this point in time. Sorry. So here's the question, and it's a question of nature versus human nature. Natural nature, as we tend to call it, what is that? Lesley Green has this quote there that I thought was quite useful to use, and that is, thinking of nature as something that belongs in a reserve is an idea that belongs in a museum. Notwithstanding all the environmental science we have, we're lost. We don't know where we are. We nature lovers don't know how to live in the nature-free world of commodities that we've made on our planet. And so when you're lost, you retrace your steps as best as you can. You go back to places you've never seen before. You explore routes in and through them again. You ask, how did we get here? What pasts are present? What futures are forming? And what connections exist that I didn't see before? And what Lesley is saying is that we're in a space that we don't quite understand. We don't quite understand why we lost our way. And so we need to stop and just go back and retrace and think about why it is that we got here, what pasts are present, what futures are forming, and what connections didn't I see before. And so I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail here on that. And she then talks about 5 sort of key themes in terms of a new way of thinking that can get us out of this place that we find ourselves in. And the first one is that she argues that we need to resituate scientific authority, in the sense of the science that we have at the moment is particularly a modernist creation that has advanced things like whiteliness, she calls it, or whiteness as it's sometimes referred to. The idea of command and control is that someone is in charge and directs activities of others, and that science is somehow apolitical, but ends up being science for hire, that the more money you have, the better your science can argue your case. And then she refers to a thing called Homo economicus, the idea that humans are only economic beings, on which a large amount of economic theory is based. And that's not the case. She argues that it's not the case. And she argues that you need to learn to listen differently, to rethink, abandon and reframe environment, and effectively argues that we need to abandon, reframe environmentalism in favor of what she calls ecopolitics, that it is a political issue for us in terms of the decline that we're seeing and the crisis that we're seeing. The second thing that she talks about is disassembling the nature-society divide, and specifically replacing this idea of a socio-ecological systems. And that's an interesting point. She's saying that extractivism is made possible by binary thinking, specifically the separation between society and ecology, the separation between life and non-life, and the separation, which is very central to modernism, is between the subject and the object. And is arguing that we need transformative processes. So we can't just continue as we are. We need something to transform it. We need a social science that does and argues for that transformation rather than just compliance that ensures the continuation of society and the behavior that we know then. And so she suggests that the central question to social sciences is what integrative research processes will contribute to unmaking this Anthropocene. Now, there's a whole argument within her text and a whole argument happening as to whether we can call this era the Anthropocene. There are other versions, the Capitalocene and others, but the essence of the argument is that humans now are such a powerful force on the planet that we are changing the planet, and it is our era in that sense. But she wants to contest human exceptionalism. She argues, and it's a complexity view, that humans are entangled with other species, that we can't disentangle ourselves, that we can't separate out ourselves. But we have done that to a large extent from the modernist perspective, is that we have separated ourselves out from nature. We see nature as separate to us as humans. And we see ourselves as the apex of that pyramid or that hierarchy. And then she's also says that the problem with ecological systems in terms of the thinking is that it doesn't take into account things like infrastructure, technology, engineering. It doesn't talk about scale beyond the natural perception range of humans. So what happens at a planetary level, we can't see that as humans generally. And then the accretion of material flow. So particularly in terms of what waste we generate, we don't actually pay attention to its accumulation. So what happens over generations of dumping plastic into rivers. And so we attend to that very poorly in terms of what we value as a society. Not that there's not attention paid to it, but that we're not paying sufficient attention to it. And she argues that the earth is a commons, but that it is owned by everyone within the biosphere in that sense, that it belongs to everyone. Whereas what we've done is, in our modernist view, is that we've argued that if I put a fence around something and I buy that property, I can own that property and it belongs to me. So there's an ownership of land, but I fenced it, and I can hand it over to others. So the whole question then becomes is that the commons is starting to disappear. And the idea that we have a common responsibility for the planet and stewardship of the planet starts to dissipate in terms of who owns what part of it and who's responsible for this mess. The next one is that she argues that we should be, so there's 5 of them, and she's arguing that we should depose the neoliberal gods of reason, and that the struggle for eco-politics in our time is a struggle against the rationality of permanent economic growth and unlimited resource extraction. So that's a fundamental idea to the modernist economic view, is that growth is unlimited. And the trading floors of the stock exchanges are premised on the fact that growth must be above a certain percentage, and that it is possible to just keep growing. She also then refers to the 3 gods of reason: technical efficiency, economic profitability, and scientific objectivity. And there's a whole lecture on each of those. But these 3 gods of reason interact with one another to then stifle any other views outside of it. And whilst neoliberalism has argued that there's a trickle-down process of wealth, it is in effect the opposite, is that it has generated the greatest inequality in the history of humanity, based on the views of Jason Hickel, an economist. She argues that we should be moving to a dignity-based ecopolitics centered on relatedness, on kinship, and on connectedness, rather than on profitability and scientific objectivity and efficiency. And that leads her into this idea of that we as humans see ourselves as masters of the planet. And she argues that we should be moving from a relation of mastery to a relation of presence, where the modernist master of conception of the universe imagines a world of only objects. It's a binary world. We separate value from facts. We separate subjects from objects, life from non-life. And in effect, what she's arguing, what she says is that all that's left afterwards for environmentalism is then moralism, is that it becomes a oughts and oughts not. This is what you ought to do. This is what you ought not to do. It cannot argue the substance of those things because of the binary impact and effect on that. The idea of objectivity is central to modernism. She problematizes that. That excludes, because it excludes relationships and interrelatedness, and that we then need to rethink the research practice. So the community, the academia needs to rethink just how do questions arise, what makes something a fact, and how do we engage the ontological rather than just the epistemological? How do things come to matter enough to be named and known? And Bateson often talks about the difference that makes the difference. How do we map versus the actual, so the territory versus the map of the territory? Green argues that the solution to this is thinking a thought, that we need to think outside of established thought and established concepts, that we need to re-encounter with what we claim to be as obvious, that this is an obvious truth, and that we need to be engaged in a continual process of reforming the self. So that what tends to happen is that we solidify around the concept of self, and we'll then become very comfortable in that. She's arguing that we need to do the opposite, is that we continuously disrupt and move and rethink, which is a very insecure, makes a lot of people very insecure. So how do we do that? And then the final aspect that she talks about is in modernist theory, we tend to focus on the subject that's inanimate, in place. And she's saying that we need to pay attention to flow and movement. That allows us then to rethink space and time. We need to be addressing the world in motion. We need to see this world in motion, which is tuned to the effects of flow and movement. And that there's an error in modernist thinking, that the ontology that sees objects fixed allows the extractivist orientation of capital and the colony. And so very much what she's problematizing is the colony, the colonial imperative, and the modernist sort of practice. And that's where she's saying lies that's where we've lost the path, in her view, is that the modernist thinking has taken us outside of nature when we are very much entangled in nature. And that the question we should be asking ourselves is then, how do we compose a common world? That we see the world as common and not just human, but also all other beings, inanimate and animate, within the world. The final so that was just the thinking of Lesley Green, and I thought it was a useful thing to start off the seminar series as we move through. But I wanted to just add two thoughts to that, and one comes out of chaos theory and just in terms of change and how we see change. And it's just a very simple exercise that you'll see here. Sorry, let me just. So if we assume that something grows at a 50% rate, or doubles every day or every time unit that you, so on day one, you have 1 unit. On day 2, you would have 2 units. On day 3, you would have 4 units, and so on, and so on, and so on. The question to us from a chaos theory perspective is, when do we as humans see the change? And in the Vaal River at the moment, there's a weed that's been growing for years, but suddenly it's a problem. And it really is from this transition point to that transition point. The rate of change is exactly the same, but the scale of change doubles, and that's when we start noticing it. And the real issue is that here is where we should be focusing on the change that takes place, because there's where we have greater possibility of making some change. So that's the one thought. The other thought is that if we look at how humanity has progressed from our early sort of hunter-gathering days to our nomadic lifestyles as in looking after flocks, looking after animals, and then domesticating animals, and then eventually creating machines and spinning jennies and big cities and ships and trading floors and cars. We've progressed during that point. Now, where on that scale did we lose it? Where from hunting, from gathering and hunting to the harnessing of steam and now computer and that kind of stuff, where did we lose it? And I'm not sure that we lost it anywhere other than that this is a continuation of the same trend. So if we look at what are some of the key problems that we have, the causes of climate change. So waste and pollution has been with us always. We've never dealt with our waste. We are the one species whose waste is toxic to the environment. We've always extracted fishing, mining, deforestation, land and sea use. We've always used land and sea to our own ends. It's just the scale at which we've done it has now changed significantly. And greenhouse gases, we've always produced greenhouse from when we discovered fire. We've always been burning stuff to advance our civilization. And so at what point did we lose the plot? And then finally, biodiversity loss. We have always been breeding animals to improve their qualities for our use. But at the same time, we are destroying the gene pools that they are reliant on. And so biodiversity loss has been taking place for us since we basically have started roaming the planet on 2 feet. So the question to Lesley Green and others is that, and to the what the hell happened to us premise of the movie Don't Look Up, is have we actually lost the plot, or is this our plot that we are simply just continuing, and the scale of it is now noticeable to us? And so just some final thoughts as I close. In conclusion, what were we thinking? What are we thinking? We seem to think that something is wrong. And with the existential threat to the biosphere, we seem to think is something wrong. But the question is why, if we think that, why can we not act sufficiently in the face of that threat? And are we lost? Where did we lose it? How did we lose it? What the hell happened to us? And maybe we haven't lost it. Maybe it is that we as a species are destined, this is our evolutionary journey. And what will happen is that eventually we will burn out. Is that the case? Can we turn that around? And I think that that's one of the fundamental questions of this series, is there a possibility of us stepping outside of that trajectory that we placed ourselves on so many aeons ago? And I think that what we need to do is that we need to start looking at the world as a complexity, as a complex system, and that the challenge for us really lies in how do we view the complexes, as in how do we see all of it, because we can't see all of it. We have limited capacity. And then the other one is how do we produce knowledge and how do we use it? So why have we demeaned indigenous knowledge and enhanced or put on a pedestal scientific knowledge? Why is that? What has driven that need? And then what decisions do we make based on that knowledge? And I think fundamentally it comes down to two key questions: is what do we value as humans, and where do we place ourselves within the complexes? Up until now, we've placed ourselves as the apex, at the top of it, not as as an entangled, integrated part of it. And I think that for us to change, and that's what Lesley Green has been saying, is that we need to rethink that. We need to think a thought and outside of that. And hopefully the seminar series can help us in stepping across that breach. So that basically is that's my input for today. So thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, so there's a whole lot of enormous things to think about there. What I would like to do is maybe open the floor to people to respond to you. Either just stick up a hand. I think that would be the best way to organize it, and then I'll just field it as it comes in, and yeah, keep my mouth shut for a little bit. Janet, let's hear from you.
Great, thanks. And maybe you can also have my face. I can participate in the seminar. So it just says my battery's running low. Listen, so I'm very happy about this seminar, because I think we need to be thinking about, oh, no, sorry, Gary, go on to somebody else. Too much going on here.
All right, we'll come back to you, Janet. Don't worry. Okay. Okay, let's just, there we go. Okay, so anyone else for the moment? Can I jump in there?
I'm actually free now.
Oh, you're free now. Okay, excellent. All right.
To free myself.
Janet, would you put your video back on? I think I turned it off.
Yeah. The hostess says the host has stopped it.
Oh.
You can't do it because the host stopped it.
Oh dear, that was me.
Yeah,
there we go.
There we go.
All right. Excellent.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm really happy about the seminar. Gary, I would have liked more of your thoughts. I thought Lesley Green is useful, but I would prefer to hear more of your perspective, especially seeing as you're working with the business chamber. And I'll explain why, because I think what I would like to do in the future is do a sort of Marxist philosophical critique of this position that you're taking, and address this question about where we've come from a sort of historical materialist perspective, because I don't think you can get away from that. And there is a sort of ecological Marxism which is trying to address Marxist theory as this modernist idea of progress and so on. But I think, at the center of what you said was this, what Lesley Green argued about the Homo economicus, and whether humans are essentially economic beings, and that idea of rational choice theory, which is at the heart of neoclassical economics. So if that critique is correct, then we have to develop an entirely new economic theory. Okay. However, the economic theory that is taught in universities, including our university, and the economic theory which is describing the global economy as we understand it, is a capitalist economy. That's what it is. And it's describing it in those terms. So you can't address the issue of the economic theory without addressing the economy that it is describing or is based on. So that's the one thing. So if we need a new social science, etc., which is true, we do. It's not just about neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is the stage of its particular set of economic policies which have been adopted in the past 20, 30 years. Okay, so it was a shift in economic policy, but it's not actually the economic system which has been in here for 200 years. And the 200-year-old industrial capitalism is actually where the problem lies. So, okay, then there's a big debate about climate change and whether global warming, which is anthropogenic, is as a result of industrial capitalism, which is based on fossil fuel extraction, okay? Or whether it goes back 2,000 years or 5,000 or 100,000 years. So if your argument is that, well, in fact, human society started exploiting the earth and extracting things from 100,000 years ago, then there's a whole different argument. And I'm arguing, and I don't want to go into this too much, maybe we need another seminar, but I'm arguing that it's not extractivism which is the problem. So you use terms like extractivism and neoliberalism, but it actually is not extractivism. It's how we utilize, how we relate to those Earth's resources. Like, is there a way of using them responsibly? Is there enough iron that we can use the iron that we have extracted already and recycle it and make the instruments or the tools that we need or the machines that we need? Or you're suggesting, no, we shouldn't have an extractive-based economy at all. i.e. we should go back to a hunter-gatherer society, which is most of human society over 100,000 years. And in fact, there is an argument which is put forward by Marshall Salins in 1970 already, which all social scientists, historians, and development studies theorists know about, which is the original affluent society, which argues that form of social production and reproduction was actually more sustainable and more affluent, that people had more leisure time. So they weren't living in poverty, they weren't living in as deprived, backward people, that they were living fulfilled and creative lives in harmony with nature. So that's an anti-development argument, I would say. So I don't know, I think we need to look at this a bit more. I like this idea, you know, the critique about ownership that is also at the heart of our industrial capitalist economic system. The idea that you can own the earth's resources as a private individual. So you have to contest that. I mean, you have to contest it as calling it what it is, which is capitalism. So what are you advocating? Okay, well, we need some kind of nice way in which everybody has an equal share in a cooperative or something. You know, what are you saying? Is there a change in the economic system that is proposed? Okay, anyway, I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't. And just one thing, Gary, I've just come from Durban, from eThekwini. It's not eThekwini, it's eThekwini. And eThekwini is having a whole process, what they call a people's planning process around a resilient government, very similar to what you're doing here in Nelson Mandela Bay. It's quite interesting, would be quite interesting to compare them.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Thanks.
So,
Sorry,
Janet,
anyway, I finished my little rave for the afternoon. I found this whole debate very challenging.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, that's, I think, what we're trying to do with the seminar series is we're trying to open that door to this debate and ask them to do what Lesley Green's suggesting, think a thought, you know, so not along pre-established lines as they are at the moment. We're at a point where we have to do something different, but can we do something different? You know, is it possible that we can actually step outside of ourselves, step outside of our nature as a species and do this, you know? So you know, you asked in terms of my personal view. I mean, I think, you know, if I look at it very simplistically, there are two models that we know of in terms of how humans have related to the earth. And there's probably a greater variation, but there's sort of indigenous community, a small a cluster of people that live within the resources of the environment that they're in and maybe migrate. And then the modernist, this capitalist, industrialist, where we've used metals and used technology to kind of further ourselves. And we've grown very wealthy and very healthy to some extent through that. But at the same time, we are driving ourselves to extinction. You know, so it to me, it doesn't make rational sense that that's the way that we do it, but it is our rationality that's driving us there. You know, so how do we unthink that? Do we return to an indigenous society? I don't think that that's possible anymore. I mean, I don't think we can abandon electricity or energy, and you know, and fossil fuels is the great driver of carbon emissions, is the way we've generated energy. You know, so, and particularly through coal. Now we've used that. We've taken a coal that we used to use for fire and heating metals and that, and we've extrapolated that. We've advanced it to such an extent that it now threatens us and the biosphere. You know, the rest of them. So I mean, I don't disagree with you that capitalism is the problem, and the way that we relate to each other through that thing is the problem. The question for me is that simply just a culmination of a long period of our development process, that what STEAM allowed us to do is to amplify what we had been doing previously, and why is it that we can't we can't see the complexes, you know. So that's for me the interesting bit, that we can't see, you know, I mean, you can see, if you clean up a river, you can see the damage that we're causing to that river. It's very obvious, you know, and it's very obvious what we need to do is we need to stop single-use plastic. Yet we don't do that, you know. And so working with the business chamber, this business chamber is an activist business chamber, and it puts climate change as central to it, and it's driving the use of renewables, etc. But it's not asking itself even more fundamental questions. Is Coca-Cola is not saying to itself, we've got to stop using plastic. They're saying we have to
They're
reduce.
not saying, should people be drinking Coca-Cola anyway?
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and that's the interesting bit for me is, so I don't assume that the corporate people are evil per se.
No.
I'm assuming that they are rational beings, and typical of the species, and they are doing things that humans have been doing for centuries. So the question then becomes is, how do you get that corporate CEO of Coca-Cola to undo what he's doing? I'm not having lived and worked in those places, I'm not sure that you're able to do that, you know. So do we then force people to change that? You know, do we need a sort of revolutionary thing? But all the revolution does is just reset it for a moment, and then we're back into the old swing of things. We keep doing what humans do, you know.
I don't agree. I don't think you can say it's like human nature. I mean, it's only 200 years that we've had this particular economic system. It's not a very long time in human history.
Yes.
Do we have other voices that want to come into this? Emma, I'm hearing you making noises.
I will. If nobody online wants to chirp in, then I'll just say a couple of things. Okay, thanks, Gary. I really enjoyed that, and I'm not familiar with the author, so I'm going to check her out. I think we resonate on so many levels with what you're talking about. All the time through your talk, I was like, oh, I want to say something about that, or I want to push against that, or I want to agree with that. So I think what you're doing is drawing attention to really important questions, and I really appreciate that. I think it takes a lot of heart and courage to do so, because it's a lot easier just to go along with the status quo. There's two things. One, you talk a lot about rationality, and in my study, I came across Murray Bookchin, who talked about the difference between a conventional rationality, which is instrumentalist in its approach and has hierarchy built into it, and with that a logic of domination, if you like, and then opposed to a ecological rationality, which is also a human part of human, what he calls a second nature. I may have to go. I've just heard fire being called in the gorge. But what I want to say is, I think that we have the potential for different types of rationality, and what is being socialized, or what's being directed through lots of different channels is more of the instrumental one. So I do think that this term rationality has a lot to unpack within it. For most of human history, as far as Bookchin was concerned, we lived in staunchly egalitarian communities in which, there was a blood oath, there was a direct reciprocity with the land that meant that your whole life and soul and spirit were attached to the land. And we don't have that now with kids growing up on mobile phones in cities. How can we expect them to have this magical ecological rationality? And it's so obvious that they're going to develop a more instrumental one. So I think there is potential to develop nodes or networks or ways to think differently. And that's why I'm interested in indigenous knowledge, and its subjugation. We're losing it. It's disappearing. We're losing indigenous cultures. So I do feel like there's a lot to be said. But I'm rambling on because I'm going to have to say goodbye, because somebody drove through the gorge shouting fire. So that means I'm sorry, I'm going to have to run, guys. Sorry,
right.
Andrea, I'll let you know.
That's okay. I understand. Go fight
Sorry.
it. Please.
Bye.
All right. Okay.
See, the question to me, Andrea, is this: is that Emma is standing up now to go and fight a fire. She's walking away from the seminar, and
Yes.
the crisis that she faces is very obvious and very imminent, and
Yes.
she's redirecting her actions to do that. And yet, the fire that we face as a planet is very obvious too, and yet we're not doing the same thing. You know, instead, what we've done is that at COP we've invited the sort of masters of the fossil fuel industry to now run our environment, our sort of climate change response. You know, and that to me that doesn't make sense. You know, so there's something wrong with the way we think. But I'm aware that when I say there's something wrong, that wrong is an evaluative judgment that I'm making. You know, so what's the right way to think? And I don't know what the right way to think is. And I sense that it lies in understanding how the complexus works, and where we locate ourselves within that complexus. I think that that's been part of the problem, is that Indigenous communities have never separated themselves out of the complexus. They've always lived within the complexus. Modern, you know, so if we, to Jana's point, if we take the last 200 years, what we have done is we've separated ourselves from nature. We've built homes and houses and fences and isolated ourselves from nature. We built cities that do exactly that because of the comfort that comes with it for us. But it is we are risking we're not actually risking everything. We are threatening everything by doing that.
And Gary, to respond to that, it seems to me that we know what the right way to think is. I mean, so I think that name, sorry, the person that you referred to offered a very nice summary of what intellectuals have been saying to each other for 50,000 years. That there is a way to think that would not lead us into this disaster. We know how to think. That's not necessarily maybe our question. It's why don't we? What is going on there? What else is going on besides the thinking? I mean, this is just something I'm thinking about now, but maybe there's something else. Will to power, for instance. Think about Putin. Think about Israel. Those are, I think, expressions of a desire for power. It's not in any way a thought process. It's not rational. There's something else. It's something emotional, I think, something related to will. So it might well be that, yeah, sure, we know what or how to think. Our academics have been telling us about how to think about this differently, how we should do things. And I think it was a very nice summary that you went through of all the things that academics have been saying about how a different thinking could happen. But as you say, it's not happening. Maybe humans are not cut out to be thinking that way. As a group, I don't know. I mean, so yeah, that's also maybe part of the question. I know we're running out of time, so but that's part of the question, is maybe we know how to think already, but somehow the practice of it is not happening. The fire is not burning at our back door yet. Okay, it might be burning at my back door and Emma's back door. Unfortunately, I'm, you know, on another continent, so I'm not going to be fighting that fire. But yeah, that fire is not burning at our back doors yet. So we are not triggered emotionally to do something about it, whereas we know what to think. It's, yeah, just a thought. We have actually run out of time, but that is fine because we have a whole year to carry on trying to wrestle with this very, very difficult problem. And so I think I want to just be diligent about time and stop us now. We will come back next week. Emma, who's just now run off, as she doesn't get burnt by the fire, she will be talking to us further about this difficult problem. I can't remember exactly what it is she'll be chatting about, but I will send out an invitation. So yes. So I just want to thank you, Gary, for kicking us off with, I think, an extremely kind of difficult problematic that you've set up for us. And I hope we will wrestle with it for the rest of the year and see what we can come up with. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this one. Please distribute the invitations far and wide. And if any of our newcomers, I see Philip and Yaku, if you would like to, or if you think you might like to present in the series, just drop me an email. And we'll keep this conversation going. Okay, so thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gary.
Janet, yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Janet.
Thanks. I've also got Tony Martell here, who's back in town, so I'm sure he'll present at some point.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Great. Just drop me an email and I'll
great.
slot you all in. All right.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you all next week. Okay.